All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Today we're gonna hear about ESG 101 from Arooshi. Arooshi is the co-founder and CEO of Oren, an award-winning ESG data and intelligence company focused on the industrial sector. Arooshi has a deep passion for making sustainability accessible for all businesses and was named one of the top 100 women from 25 countries leading global climate tech startups. So I'm going to pass it over to Arshi to give us a whole presentation that she's prepared for us. And then in the second half of the event, we can go into questions and answers as well. If you do have any questions that pop up for you while Arshi is speaking, feel free to use the Q&A box that you should be able to find in the Zoom feature. That'll be the best way for us to filter through questions in the second half of the event. So over to you, Arshi.
Thank you so much, Shamali. And yes, I think just during my conversation as well, I will be taking pauses. So in case you want to kind of ask me questions, then happy to take them if there's something on the slide that was just before that. But yes, I am so excited to be here. A little bit background about myself. I was part of the Pandas cohort of Terra.2, which was, I think, starting March of 2021. I had just moved to the US then. And yeah, I think Terra was a great way for me to learn a lot about climate, but also just find my own community in US. I didn't have a lot of friends. So that was quite nice. I have a presentation prepared for today, so I'll quickly present that. I hope my screen is visible, Shamali.
Yes, you're visible. Great.
Perfect. Perfect. So the agenda for today is ESG 101. ESG is a very, very broad topic. So I'm going to try my best to distill it in a fashion that kind of makes sense to you and how ESG kind of features as a climate solution. Right. There's also a lot of controversy around ESG as well as a topic. So I'll try to address some bits of it. But of course, I'll drop in my LinkedIn at the end of the conversation. And in case you want to have a one-on-one discussion, happy to do that. I was just talking to Shamli that I love talking about ESG. Right. And again, there are some good things about it, and then there are some bad things about it. So happy to kind of discuss both with you. A little bit background about me. As Shamli mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Oren. I super like a logo because we have these three thingies on top, and this is E, S, and G, right? We're a ESG data intelligence and consulting company, and we're focusing primarily on just large industries, right? Like we do a lot of work with the chemical sector, pharmaceutical sector, manufacturing sector in general. Right, we do not do work with just services, etc. So that's why my capability and we have done work with them, but we're slowly kind of building our product more to cater toward these industries. And so my expertise and my understanding more kind of lies towards these sectors. We won a bunch of awards, something I'm really proud of, and I try to kind of mention it every time I can. But without much further ado, I'll move into the agenda. So today we just discussed just the basics of ESG, why we need ESG, why is ESG a climate solution? Beyond that, I think something that everyone loves knowing, what is the business case around ESG? I'll talk a little bit about that. Then the market landscape. Like I said, ESG is broad and there are lots of companies kind of targeting it from different angles. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions around that. I will also talk about a corporate climate journey. I've picked up the case study of Nike because I really love the brand myself, and just talk about what are certain E, S, and G parameters for Nike. And then, of course, right, I think if anyone's on Twitter, they would have heard Elon Musk calling ESG a scam. So I'd love to address that and talk about why ESG was called a scam and if at all it is or not, right? In terms of where ESG fits as a climate solution, this chart kind of helps me talk a little bit about that. If you remember, there are these 5 broad categories of emissions, right? And ESG falls primarily in the industry segment of that chart that I think we've all seen. And what this helps is, I think it just helps us understand that the industries that we interact with, right? We see chemicals here, we see cement here, We see fugitive emissions, we see energy use in buildings, etc. ESG is a way to kind of bring out data on how these industries run themselves and how do they utilize a lot of the raw materials or social capital that they do, right? So that's pretty much how ESG kind of fits into this entire segment, which is kind of bringing out the key, just how much water was consumed, how much waste was consumed, what were the climate risks like, etc., through the entire ecosystem. In terms of what ESG means, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. It's kind of you see ESG and sustainability being used interchangeably. ESG is typically a way to quantify sustainability, right? Sustainability means different things to different people, right? Even if right now I was to kind of ask all of you, what does sustainability mean for you? I think we'll all have roughly slightly different reactions to it, right? Some might say that, hey, okay, plastic pollution, or some might say that, hey, the oceans, or just air pollution, etc. So ESG is a way to kind of very strictly quantify the scope of that sustainability and divide it across 3 segments, right? Something that I would like to also mention is that sustainability is typically kind of viewed as environment, sustainability. But ESG also includes other parameters like social and governance. And that's because it's always referred to in the context of a corporate where social and governance become very, very important parameters as well. When we look at the environment bucket, there are, again, I've just listed 3 out here, but there are multiple more, right? It's just about how the company is kind of managing its climate strategy, which is the impact the company's operations is having on the environment in general. What is the company doing around that, right? Like if they have some amount of water consumption, how much of that are they recycling year on year? And again, whatever they're not recycling, how much are they processing it? If they're in a place that has depleting groundwaters, what are they doing about that, right? So that's one example. Emissions form a core part of it, right? And that's where you see lots of companies setting their net zero goals. So this becomes very important on how a company is managing their emissions as well. Operational efficiency also kind of comes here. I think circular economy, if you all have kind of learned that in Terra as well, that if companies are using materials, how are they kind of finding ways of bringing it back, right? Just ensuring that their waste converts into value, and how are they kind of just inculcating that into different parts of their operations. And biodiversity, land use. Social includes the company's impact on any kind of just stakeholders they might have, right? It could be internal or external. Internal is your employees, top management, board of directors. External could be your suppliers, the communities that you're a part of, the regulators, etc. So just the impact on that. Governance is basically how a company runs itself, right? How transparent are they regarding their operations, why they do a certain thing, right? Even if they have a board, how is the board elected? How ethical are those practices? Even when the company kind of has processes around managing just governance issues like, say, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, just anti-sexual harassment, these kind of things as well. What is the process of kind of managing that, right? So that it's just kind of managed in a transparent manner. And the person kind of making these complaints is protected, right? So there's just rules around those kind of things. In terms of again, like this is like how does ESG help in any of this, right? I think how ESG helps is that it just creates this level of transparency, which eventually leads to action, right? So when companies kind of release their sustainability report or ESG report in the first year, the purpose of that is to just create transparency, right? That I think in a financial report, you can very well see what are the sales, what are the margins, what were the operating profits, etc. of the company. The ESG report is a way of kind of bringing forth that, okay, how much emissions did they create and where it came from. We've all learned about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So what part of it comes from which of these parameters, right? And what comprises of their scope 1, what comprises of their scope 2, so on and so forth. In terms of the waste that they generate, what categories does this waste fall into and how are they processing each of those categories, right? If there are any climate risks, what are their thoughts on accounting for those climate risks and opportunities, and what are they doing about minimizing those climate risks as well, right? So ESG forms a way of creating transparency around a company's operations And then what we see is that companies then, based on the data, that base data that they create in the first year, they create certain sustainability goals, and then that drives that action, right? Once a company has created a sustainability goal, they have to kind of ensure that they're meeting it, right? If I say I want to cut down my water consumption by 10% year on year, right? That would require my operations team to think through how that can happen, right? And that's like a public commitment that I've made, and that will lead to action, like positive action towards sustainability. So that's just basically how ESG kind of helps companies become more responsible actors as well. Talking about the business case of for ESG, right, which basically means who cares about ESG. So for me as well, right, when I started the company, I was a very just how your mind is very climate oriented, right? Like for people like us, we're reading about climate change, etc., on a daily basis, right? And even like I'm from India, right? And India is today just experiencing so much. Like I think anything bad that can happen on the climate perspective, India has some impact of it, either in the north or in the south, etc. Right? So for me, it was very, very real. So even when I started this company, I was just a little too angry or a little too aggressive when talking to customers. But what I realized and is that that just is detrimental in the long term, right? Like if I wanted the company to take certain action, I will have to talk to them in a language that they understand and in a language that kind of appeals to them, right? And that would require us to create a business case around ESG, right? I mean, in all honesty, right? I think something that I've realized that there's a very small percentage of companies out there who really care about ESG and things like that. And that's why you do need, just like this whole, in the carrot and stick analogy, a lot of ESG today is more stick than a carrot, but soon there are solutions, the carrot solutions being developed around ESG as well, right? So what is the business case of ESG? Number one, customers today more and more look at ESG credentials when they're making purchasing decisions. What this means is that when we work with customers as well, right, a lot of them are B2B customers in the chemicals, pharmaceutical space. They're probably supplying to Pfizer, Novartis, etc. Even if you look at Apple, like lots of these large organizations have set very strict ESG rules for their suppliers, right? That they have to meet certain compliances. What that means is that they will have to do regulatory reporting, and they will have to set certain climate goals, and just ensure that they're meeting those climate goals as well to be able to supply to these organizations. So one stakeholder that really cares about about ESG is the customers. The next is investors. Today, and again, there's some controversy around this aspect, but like Blackstone, Carlyle, etc., these investors have set certain ESG goals for themselves. We work with one Blackstone portfolio company and one Carlyle portfolio company. And these investors are really, really particular about their ESG commitments, right? For both of these customers, right, on a quarterly basis, we have to create a progress report on the ESG front and submit it to them. And if even one little data point is here or there, or the progress is not what was projected, the customer does get a lot of questions on why and what will be done around it. So investors are really serious about looking at ESG data as well. Employees, I think that could be true for lots of folks like us, but I think just as more and more people become more aware of the issues of climate change and just other social and governance issues as well, employees prefer working with companies that have better ESG practices, right? And again, no employee is going to go look at an ESG score of a company or an ESG report of a company. But when you're applying for a job, you do want to look at, okay, what are certain benefits that you give your employees, right? From a climate perspective, have you set any goals for yourself, right? If me as a woman, right, if I was applying for a job, I would want to know that, okay, how high can I climb, right? And how fast would that be? And how transparent is the company around the systems for that, right? So these kind of things become very important to employees as well. Regulators, of course. Today, almost all large geographies have a regulation around ESG. What that means is that ESG reporting has become mandatory for most large publicly listed for most publicly listed companies and large private companies. This means that on an annual basis, companies will have to disclose their financial performance as well as their non-financial performance, and the non-financial performance is in the form of a ESG report. So most large economies have that. I think US is one which doesn't have a formal regulation yet, where again, the SEC has put out a proposal and we should hear back on what's happening on that by fall or the last quarter of this year as well. So that's that. Banks as well. Even banks today, if corporates want to apply for loans, right, you have this thing called sustainability linked loans, which are loans that kind of, I think the interest of that is kind of decided based on how companies are performing on their sustainability goals, or green bonds, green loans, which kind of are very dependent on a company meeting its sustainability goals. Beyond that, even without these sustainability linked loans, lots of banks today, when they do their due diligence, while they obviously ask companies for the annual reports and financial performance, even they've started looking at lots of sustainability data and sustainability performance beyond that. So these are the key stakeholders. But beyond that, based on the work that we've done, we see that these are the prime that kind of emerge, right? And lots of companies don't only have to comply with one. Taking an example of one company that we work with, right? These folks are, it's a auto ancillary customer, and they make like pistons. Piston is a component of a car, of car or trucks, like large vehicles. So they make these pistons. And when they signed us on, the job that they signed us on for was to create an ESG report for their regulator, right? But as we kind of stayed with them through the year, they started receiving ESG data requests from lots of their customers, right? So they supply to Hyundai, BMW, Honda. There's a large customer. There's a large company called Maruti in India. So they start getting lots of requests on ESG data from these folks because they were the tier one supplier to these companies. So while they were creating their annual ESG report, they also started providing data for all of these aspects to their customers. Sometimes we also have customers who, while are creating a regulatory report, then they might also have to create a separate one in case they're looking for private equity funding or something of that sort. So they're just, it's very, very serious in all of these regards. Now, talking about the market landscape, like I said, ESG is huge, right? It starts with the measurement component, and then it moves into the action aspect, and there are different companies and solutions that cater to each part of this journey, right? The first bit, and this is somewhere where my company also sits, is a measure and report, right? Any company, right? Any customer out there that we have that kind of starts on their ESG journey. In the first year, their key challenge is that they don't know what to do. Today, a very small percentage of companies out there actually have a sustainability team. So even when we reach out to customers, we typically speak with the CFO or someone in the finance team, and rarely sometimes someone on the legal team or the compliance team to talk to them regarding this, right? So it's super, super new. So that's why, and that's the reason for that is because companies are, creating their first or second sustainability report. So the first problem to be solved is measuring and reporting of that sustainability data, right? Once that is done, then companies get into setting those sustainability goals, right? And after they've set those sustainability goals is when they start taking that action. So there are just different companies across this entire across this entire ecosystem. I'll come back to this in a bit. I don't know why I added this slide. It's supposed to be a little later, but I'll just come back to this in a bit as well. Yeah, just thinking about a typical corporate ESG journey, right? This is what I was kind of talking about on how companies kind of keep increasing the scope of what they do from an ESG perspective, or how much money or how much budget are they spending towards ESG just keeps increasing year on year. Right? In the first year, all the company cares about is being compliant, right? Which is that one of those external stakeholders that we looked at has told them that, hey, I need your ESG data. I need it across this framework. Please give it to me by this day, right? So that's all they care about. They just kind of try to bring their team together that, hey, these are the parameters and we have to report on this, right? I think through this piece, and I think lots of companies we work with are in this one or on the efficient phase of their sustainability journey. And something that's very interesting that we learned, right? That there is no such thing as ESG data, right? All in all, it's all enterprise data on which calculations have to be performed to be converted into ESG data, right? So that's the big problem, right? Like while companies might have a lot of this data, and they also don't have a lot of this data, but either they have it or they don't have it. Even for the ones they have it, they just don't know how to kind of translate that into emissions or just other ESG data. One example of that is emissions, right? Something that we're all very familiar with. companies don't record emissions data. If you look at their ERP, right, they don't capture emissions data unless it's a regulatory requirement for them. What they tend to have is electricity data, fuel consumption data, the refrigerant data, which then has to be converted into either scope 1 or scope 2 data, depending on what type of company it is, right? So like we do a lot of that work, and that's help that companies need, right? So that's compliance, like just basic compliance is what they want to do. The next step from there is that once now the companies have seen that, oh, this is what my base level data looks like, right? So then they want to start improving that data. That's when they set these long-term ESG goals, net zero, diversity, waste reduction, water consumption reduction, or recycling more water. They set these kind of goals, and they set KPIs based on that, right? Depending on their operations, the size of the business. And then they start also improving their data, right? Like it just would be horrible if a company reported X ton of emissions last year and they're X+5 without any reason, right? Like they did not increase their operations, they did not add a factory, etc. That's just horrible for those companies, right? So those companies just try to find ways in which they can just start reducing their emissions or reducing their negative impact and increasing that positive impact year on year. That's when a company starts becoming efficient and start looking at their ESG data more seriously. Next is responsible. This is when the company starts engaging their supply chain partners in their ESG process, right? I think something we would have heard about scope 3 as well, right? Like for most industries, and this is especially true with the industries that we work in, only 25 to 30% of the data of the emissions impact kind of sits within the company's boundaries. Like 70% is sitting in their is sitting in their supply chain. Right? So companies have to really start engaging their supply chain to guide them on how they can capture this information, and B, how they can start setting goals for them to start reducing the negative impact as well. I think something that I personally have a big complaint against is that today, right, when we work with lots of these tier 1 suppliers of large corporates, they complain that, yes, right, while they have to spend so much money and effort towards, accounting for their ESG data and find ways of reducing that, these large corporates do not necessarily give them a premium, right? Like there's no benefit that they get out of doing this, right? So I really hope that the industry kind of moves in a direction wherein there is some premium or some benefit for the folks that are doing well on their ESG numbers. Based on what I've heard, right, I think Apple and Walmart and a couple others are the only organizations out there who have literally started firing suppliers that do not meet certain ESG requirements, right? But again, the sectors we work with, you need like specialty chemicals for things. You need specialty APIs for certain pharma products, right? So so again, if the supplier is giving to them at a certain cost, that's what the companies care about, right? But and if the supplier says, hey, I'm not going to do it, which most of these companies do not, but if they choose to say, hey, I don't want to do it, there's not much that the end customer or the large enterprise can do about it, because they still need that at that price, etc. Right? So there's also work to be done in that regard. Beyond that, responsible companies also make business decisions based on ESG, right? Thinking about the climate risks, right? What is their current climate risk and opportunity profile, and how they can just mitigate or minimize their risk as well, right? So they tend to consider all of these things when making decisions. On the cost perspective as well, right? I think something that we keep repeating to our customers and just to ourselves as well, that sustainability also means profitability. Right, if done right, if you do implement proper circular economy solutions, right? If you do implement ways in which you can just recycle water, if you're recycling 50% of the water, you are buying 50% less water, right? So that just is a big saving on cost for you. And we've seen this happen so many times, wherein just sustainability practices, while was a capital was like a capital cost when they implemented that solution, year on year, it just results in them results in reduction of cost for them, right? So it just helps in that regard as well. And last but not the least is as a leader for companies on the ESG space, right? Wherein companies that are kind of positioning themselves as the most sustainable brand in that regard. And what this means is that lots of companies set up, just think tanks on solutions that can be developed to decarbonize our industry. They invest money and their top researchers or their top people to kind of find solutions to just decarbonize the entire industry as a whole, right? Even these companies start rethinking their products, right? That okay, we have 5 product categories, out of which certain are very polluting whilst others are not, and they kind of start rethinking that entire process. What aspect of this product is polluting, right? And how can we kind of reduce that impact, and what more can be done, right? And sometimes they're able to do it in a way that doesn't impact the cost for the end consumer as well, right? So we started seeing a lot of solutions in that regard as well. I'll take a pause because I need to breathe, and I talk very fast, and I'll also kind of read the questions until then.
Thanks, Arooshi. I think there are quite a few questions coming in, but maybe the first one that you could address that a couple of folks have asked is, what software tools do you recommend companies use to track their data?
What software? Okay. So today there are multiple software players, right? I think, like I mentioned, my company as well, we do have a platform that helps companies account for their emissions and ESG data and that of their supply chain as well. But again, depending on your again, like just there's Persephone, there's Watershed, etc. There are lots of great solutions out there today, right? So depending on your geography and depending on the scope of your industry as well, like lots of these products tend to focus on certain industries over others, right? I think if you see the entire carbon accounting or ESG market, right, like lots of players have started kind of doubling down on certain industries, because for that scope 3 product to be built in, you have to have certain sector alignment and sector expertise to implement it well, right? So maybe again, I'd love to hear what industry you're a part of, and I can maybe give recommendations based on that. But Persephone, Watershed, our company are some great solutions for you.
Thank you.
I can take Rituja's question as well. Could you speak about the perception of ESG across industries? And how does the ESG compliance pressure differ across industries? Yeah, right. This is also, today there is some difference from a sector perspective. One is that there are certain industries that are more front and center, right? You hear a lot, and we did this little experiment. I think we did this about a year ago, wherein the retail industry, right? We hear a lot about a lot of pressure being put on H&M, Zara, etc. These retailers to be more sustainable, right? That all, there are some rules around that. Now there are lots of folks like us, like millennials, Gen Z. We particularly prefer working with brands that are more sustainable, right? So we did this little experiment wherein we kind of asked a lot of people in our network, and by the end of it, we kind of asked 100 people, kind of are in that category of millennials and Gen Z. And out of the folks that did want to engage with brands that are more sustainable and ethical, we asked them, what do they mean by sustainability, right? What does sustainability mean to you? And what we learned is that like there is such a vast difference of that meaning as well, right? Like some say that just better raw materials, some say sustainable cotton, some say I think fair wages for the supply chain, some say better packaging or recyclability, etc. Right? And taking these insights to brands, right? Like for brands that are more consumer facing, they don't know how to kind of position themselves, right? So consumer facing brands have their own challenges, but kind of like the kind of companies that we do work with, right, which is these industries, they do not have consumer pressure, so to speak, but they have customer pressure, right? Like for today, I think like for these companies, right, about almost 100% of their customers need you to have ESG data, right? So companies that are heavily polluting, like and hard to abate, if they're doing business with companies, they need to have certain emissions baseline data, etc. in place. In addition to that, you have something called CBAM coming up, which is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is a European Union regulation on just carbon management across borders, right? That there will be a certain percentage of carbon tax for certain high polluting industries versus others, right? So with that, also certain industries will be under more pressure than others, right? So I hope that answers.
Thanks, Rajuta, for your question.
Will IFRS sustainability? Yes, I'm taking Parikshit's question next.
Sure.
That yes, yeah, there are a lot of ESG frameworks out there, right? I think even if you compare say Canada, EU, UK, India, Singapore, Dubai, right? Like the Australia, right? Lots of them have are kind of aligning themselves with a different ESG framework over others, right? But you're right, like the IFRS sustainability disclosure standard, it seems like that would be the one that all of these reporting standards converge into. There is a big need for this convergence, right? So today, if I'm an investor, right, and if I invest in sustainable companies, and if I'm evaluating one company based in Singapore versus another company based in Canada, while there is some standardization of financial metrics, right? So I can very easily tell that, okay, this is more profitable, this has more margins, etc. But on the sustainability aspect, that it's very hard to do, right? Because the sustainability, the Singapore company follows a very different framework versus that in Canada, right? So that's why this IFRS is a way to kind of bring standardization across. So right now what's happened is just the framework guideline is out, but it still depends on different countries to adopt it. From what I know, Singapore and Malaysia are the two jurisdictions that have adopted it. I believe there are certain countries in Africa also that have adopted it, right? That this will be the framework that we follow. Beyond that, what we see is that certain existing standards like TCFD kind of merging into it, right? So now TCFD, like the ISSB will be responsible for managing TCFD. I believe there was news that even GRI would kind of roll up into ISSB or I mean, they're kind of considering something of that sort, right? So yes, we do think kind of convergence of all of these reporting frameworks will happen.
And do you know
How
which
does,
ones do you think will? Sorry, that was my question. I just wanted to understand, could we maybe put into the chat which ones? I'm not sure of the forestry one you mentioned. Forestry, you said?
No, I said IFRS.
Sorry.
I'll add it to the chat.
RS, sorry. Oh, sorry. I was like forest. I thought I heard forest. Sorry. Okay.
That's okay. Yeah, IFRS. Yeah.
IFRS. Thank you. And so, do you have any inkling, like where in the UK, which framework will kind of rise to the top? Sorry.
Like I said, right? Like right now, the IFRS has been released, right? The guideline to it has been released, but it depends on the UK if the UK government will adopt it, right? So this is out, but now it's onto the various jurisdictions or the various countries to adopt it and kind of pick it up and kind of make that mandatory for their corporates. The problem, right, and on honesty, is that the UK framework was also the new framework was also launched, I think, a year or two ago, right? So kind of it's very confusing for the companies that, hey, every 2 years you have a new framework coming my way, right? It's hard to take these things seriously for the companies if every two years there's something new coming their way. Even in India, right? We have something called BRSR, which was kind of the previous financial year was the first year companies kind of did that. And now if the Indian government adopts IFRS, it's poles apart from what BRSR is. So expecting companies to then build capability on this entire new framework is very, very challenging, right? So there's just going to be a lot of, I don't know what the word is, right? There's just going to be a lot of movement in the industry, but I don't know who's going to adopt what, in all honesty. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
No, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Do you want to continue with the questions, Arooshi, or?
Yeah, there are way too many questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
I thought there were 1, 2, and I was like, okay, I could take a pause, but I think I'll just finish this up and come back to it.
Sounds
Sorry.
good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
In terms of when I was talking about the implementation cycle, right, or the implementation methodology, I've kind of mentioned this a couple of times earlier, but this is how companies kind of tend to look at it. Right? If any enterprise that you look at in the first year, they'll just create a baseline ESG report, right? Which is, hey, this is what my ESG data is, right? And actually something interesting about what Leanne's question was, right? That today there are two types of reporting frameworks or standards, right? One that goes like if anyone of you has looked at GRI, and I'm happy to share some GRI reports with you. GRI goes very deep in the data, right? They want to know what your waste data was, what your water data was, how did you process that water, how much you recycled, again, just emissions and just very, very core data points. While there are certain others like TCFD, which does require you to talk about your emissions data, but almost everything else is kind of slightly more strategic, right? That how does the board, what's the board's oversight on climate risks, right? What is the board doing to mitigate climate risks, right? What are certain governance mechanisms in place? So kind of these two also are very, very different. So for a company to, right, like go from this very data heavy approach when they build capabilities, they've kind of brought in changes in their ERP, right, which is an enterprise resource planner, like a management system, to then kind of start accounting for climate risks, etc. It's a very, very complex process. So yeah, I really hope this convergence happens in a way that, you can kind of account for both types of companies. But yeah. So the first year is when companies create this baseline report, either for a regulator or a customer or an investor, whoever their stakeholder is. And then from year 2 onwards, they just start, they just keep creating an annual ESG report from there on, right? Once the ESG baseline report is created, then companies get into creating sustainability goals, right? These are created, of course, based on if I'm creating sustainability goals for my company, say if I'm a pharmaceutical company, right? There are certain, topics that are very material to my business and certain that are not so much, right? Emissions is material to every single business, so you have to include emissions. Water, right? When I'm creating my when I'm creating my my products, I utilize a lot of water, right? And lots of this has to be again, water of a certain quality, and sometimes you can't use recycled water, or the recycling mechanism is really expensive because it kind of is medicine. So there are some rules around that. So that is a big topic for me. Packaging, I use a lot of plastic packaging material as well, right? So these are kind of some certain material topics for me, and then I create sustainability goals across each of these, right? And then I start including that in my annual report, and I show my progress on my sustainability goals as well, right? And in my Nike example, I'll show you how this happens. And then the company also starts creating initiatives, right, to meet the sustainability goals, right? If I have said that say water, plastic, and emissions are very material to my company, I will set initiatives on what I'm going to do to meet these sustainability goals, and I'll start reporting on my progress on me on those initiatives, right? Hey, I've implemented this process, and now 20% of my water is recycled, etc., etc. I'll start doing that. And after this is when companies kind of then start looking into their supply chain, right? Because like I said, 70% of the emissions for certain industries comes from their supply chain. In addition to that, right, just even when you look at certain governance and social issues like human rights or anti-bribery practices or business ethic practices, right? The scope of that is not limited to the company. It has to also extend out into your supply chain, right? So that's why the goals that companies set also includes any responsible company will also include their supply chain into it, right? So that's how it's typically done. Another thing, right, like we do some work in supply chain sustainability as well. And with lots of these chemicals and pharmaceutical companies, they have about 60,000 or 100,000 suppliers, right? And you can only imagine, like, dealing with 60,000, 100,000 companies that do not want to do this, right? They're getting no benefit out of doing this. Like, these companies do not typically give them a premium. I think it is changing. I do read the news that there are companies evaluating changes in their policies around this, but today there's not proper premiums available. So it's just such a hard task getting scope 3 data from their suppliers on just various aspects of their business. So what we tend to do is, and I think the general industry practice is that companies tend to kind of start with, say, 10% of their suppliers, right? And this could be maybe starting with their highly polluting suppliers, or just very like the raw material focused suppliers, the suppliers that are closest to their business. And then they kind of take another 30%, another 50%. Like, these are not industry standards, but just depending on the industry, companies tend to roll it out to their suppliers slowly, right? And that's why you'll see lots of these goals are 10 years out, 20 years out, because the implementation of lots of these things, it just does take that long. Sometimes it takes companies 3 to 4 years to cover their entire supply chain and actually get data from their entire supply chain. in addition to that, there are certain suppliers who just say no, like that. I just cannot capture data, and I will not capture data until you pay me more, right? So then you have to just create estimates as well. That okay, that this supplier does X amount of X dollars of business with me, and it's based in this location, and the grid of this location is something of this sort, and the energy intensity of other suppliers of this size is something, right? So you just have to create estimations on lots of these suppliers as well, because the supply chain sustainability is really hard. It's really, really hard. Even with a product and solution, it just becomes very complex to deal with. So yeah. I'll take up a Nike case study. This is super light, and I'm just trying to find a way to kind of help you understand what material topic what topics kind of fall under E, S, and G. So Nike has set certain 2025 targets for themselves. So they have certain short-term targets and certain long-term targets as well, right? So the short-term targets are around aspects of their business which are the most negative, have the most negative impact on the environment. Of course, emissions and the waste that they create, right? And the fresh water consumption in terms of the production of their footwear, their clothes, etc. So these are certain short-term goals. If you look at the environment pillar, these are the 4 broad categories that are very core to Nike's business. One is their materials, right? If they use materials that can only be used once, and they do not have any circular practices, that's a very bad way of doing business for Nike, right? Because it's almost all directly kind of going into landfills, right? So Nike is kind of trying really hard to use recycled material, polyester, nylon, and using sustainable cotton into their operations. This also helps them reduce costs, and also, of course, reduce the amount of emissions that they create, right? Like stuff is not going into the landfill, so that does cause reduction in emissions. They're doing a lot around circular solutions as well. But in trying to kind of build ways in which I think you can give your old Nike shoe. There's a part on their website as well. You can give back your old Nike shoe, and I think for free, and they kind of handle the entire recycling of that aspect as well. And they're also finding ways in which, parts of the shoe can be reused, right? Maybe like just the shoelace can be kind of cleaned up and reused for another shoe, and just finding ways in which that can happen. Emissions as well, like they're trying to use more sustainable fuels, trying to use renewable energy for the electricity to cut down their emissions, and of course waste. Lots of these practices above result in the reduction in their waste as well. On the social parameter, and they're trying to work a lot with on the DEI aspect. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, 51% of their workforce is women. Beyond that as well, they have lots of initiatives in place to encourage more racial and ethnic minorities to join their offices and kind of just feel at home. Sustainable sourcing, they're trying to hire more diverse suppliers, and they also have certain supply chain sustainability practices, scope 3 practices for their suppliers, right? And communities, they invest a lot in their communities as well. And there are multiple programs, and I've just listed 2 of those here. On the governance pillar as well, and this was quite a joy for me to read. Nike has, and I can happy to share the link to this page as well. Like Nike is very transparent about all the policies that they have. Their policies are cover their suppliers, their business partners, etc. It talks about their board responsibilities, right? What does the board do? How is the board a board candidate hired? Why are they hired? What are some characteristics that the board member should have, right? Even in terms of their management reviews, they're very transparent about all of the policies, and any of us can kind of question it, right? That, hey, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And there's somewhere on the website where it's publicly available. And this is very important in ESG, right? Anything that a company do, it's very important for them to make it available to all the stakeholders on their website, right? So any time you that's right. Just learning about ESG is slightly easy in that regard. If you care a lot about, say, the retail industry, you could just kind of look into the ESG reports of these retail giants and kind of trace back to where they started and where they are. And it's publicly available. And that also kind of helps these companies be more transparent, because there are lots of these NGOs and not-for-profits out there who are tracking this data. right? So even if companies do greenwashing, and there is some bit of greenwashing out there, even if there is greenwashing done, these NGOs are very stringent in terms of their methodology of tracking this information. Another way to counter greenwashing is that regulators now are mandating assurance, right? So any company that discloses an ESG report, just like financial reports, there has to be a third party auditor or assurance that has to be done on top of that to ensure that every data point is correct, and the emissions factor utilized or the conversions utilized is correct, right? To kind of minimize the greenwashing there. Yes, sustainability is profitability. It's just a way that it just doesn't always mean that you have to spend more money, buy expensive products and processes, etc. Like Nike is really using sustainability as a way to be more profitable. They're just kind of purchasing lesser material, right? Which kind of does help them improve their bottom line as well. Now, the next topic is, are tobacco companies more sustainable than Tesla, right? And I'm not sure if y'all read this, right? Which is Elon Musk kind of tweeted out ESG is a scam, and I believe S&P Global that was rated Philip Morris, which is the company that owns Marlboro, and even Chevron has a higher ESG rating than Tesla, right? So what that means. In ESG, like I said, there are multiple there are multiple aspects to ESG. What we've been talking about so far is an ESG report, right? An ESG report is just like, again, a financial report, wherein a company talks about its financial, it's a very objective statement of a company's financial performance. There is no opinion on top of that, right? A company will very objectively say that these were my emissions last year, this is my emission this year, and hence I have reduced my emissions by 10%. Right? That's an objective statement. There are no two ways around that. Right? That's an ESG report. Another set of players in the ESG market are ESG rating providers, and that gives companies ESG ratings or ESG scores, and they're kind of the problem areas, right? And these are companies like MSCI, which is Morgan Stanley. I forget what C is for, but something index, DJSI. Dow Jones Sustainability Index, etc. Right? So these companies tend to give an opinion based on the ESG data of the company. So what they do is they kind of analyze the publicly available data of a company, and based on that, they give a company a rating, right? So the pros of this, right? The pros of this are that today there are, like I said, right, there are so many sustainability reporting standards out there. The example I'll take from earlier that, when we are evaluating the Canadian company to invest in versus the Singapore company, right? If we have a rating provider, I could just tell them that, hey, could both of you go talk to MSCI and get a rating for yourself? Then I can very objectively kind of compare the two of them, right? Because getting into their sustainability report is complex for me, right? But today there are just so many of these rating providers, and what you see is that one company that scores really high on one ESG rating provider might score very low on another ESG rating provider, right? And the reason for that is all of these rating providers tend to have a very different methodology than others. And not all of these rating providers are very transparent about the methodology that they've used, right? So that's why it just becomes very complex, right? So the reason why Tesla was scored lower than some of these is, I think S&P is not very transparent about their methodology on that one. Second, while Tesla has, I think it's one of the most sustainable car manufacturing company in the world, it just probably had certain questionable social and governance standards, right? And that's why the rating was lower on Tesla's part. I think just Elon Musk's behavior also kind of, like, these rating agencies also tend to look at the negative press the company gets, right? And the negative press, I mean, of course, yeah, Chevron gets a lot, and both of these do get a lot of negative press, but again, just the combination of multiple such things kind of added up in Tesla getting a low score, right? And it's horrible. In all honesty, these ESG ratings are highly gameable as well, right? I'm sure if, like, there are 80 of us right now, if all of us put our brains to it, we can very easily think of ways to kind of increase the, incorrectly just increase the sustainability rating of a company, right? So it's kind of gameable. And even we have customers that come to us asking us that, hey, I got a DJSI score of X. Can you help me increase it? Right. And we can't we can look at a company and just very easily figure out that what is not okay with that company and what are aspects that can help them increase that score as well. So it's very gameable, but in all honesty, that's not an objective that's not an objective statement on how the company is doing on from an ESG performance perspective, right? So a high ESG score by these rating agencies doesn't necessarily mean that that company has more superior ESG practices, right? Another thing is that lots of these unsustainable companies also tend to have the largest ESG teams out there, right? If you were to just compare the sustainability team of Chevron, I think it's world class, right? It's got like 20 plus people. I don't know, I've not looked into it, but I'm sure it's going to be a large team, and they put in a lot of money around just trying to game just other aspects of their ESG numbers, because that one parameter of emissions is just so bad, right? Their emissions, waste, etc. These parameters are just so bad. So they try to have like the top-notch number in other aspects, right? And that results in their just ESG ratings becoming very, very good. So whenever you see ESG, okay, you just make sure that you know that you're looking at an ESG rating or you're looking at an ESG report, right? So with that, right, just this is the last slide, and ESG has a lot of problems, right? We've kind of talked about some of them already. The first one is that way too many frameworks and standards. It's hard, like for me, right? I work in the industry. It's hard for me to keep up with everything that's happening. ISSB. It took me like what? I've still not finished reading the entirety of it. It was released, I think, on the 26th of June or something like that. And it's just such a long document. And for you to understand what it is, etc., it takes a lot of time. So just way too many standards and frameworks out there. Second is that environment-related disclosures, while are the most important, they don't always necessarily carry the highest weightage. And this is more true for the ESG ratings part, less on the report. But sometimes it just kind of gets lost in, you need thousands of data points for an ESG report. So that little emissions part just gets lost somehow, right? ESG ratings are opaque and hence are not very reliable. One problem that we face a lot, right, and which is just very enraging as well, is companies today, and that's rely more on just buying cheap carbon credits rather than actually spending time and effort in reducing their emissions impact, right? And we I think about a couple of months ago, this was in the news a lot, right? Where just some carbon credit project was considered bad, and just lots of issues happening in the carbon credit space, and that is true, right? Like sometimes a carbon credit like per ton costs you some $10, $20, versus to kind of switch your electricity provider or switch to a better fuel costs you $25, $30 per ton of carbon, right? So companies tend to kind of gravitate towards the first solution, which is a horrible way of kind of going ahead. I think I read in the news recently that Nestle, the CPG company Nestle, they have committed that they're not going to do carbon credits at all. And they're going to entirely work towards decarbonizing or just reducing their impact by investing in better products, better technology, better solutions, right? So that we really hope that more of that comes our way. But sometimes, see, I do think carbon credits are very, very important. Sometimes it's really impossible for you to decarbonize. In that way, kind of, buying good quality carbon credits is very important, right? So just companies are finding the easy way out there. And last, right, I've already kind of complained about this enough, but supply chains are really hard, and companies need to give more support to their suppliers and premiums to encourage them to adopt reporting. It's extremely, extremely important. Right. With that was the last bit. I'll stop presenting. Any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, and I'll try to take questions in the meanwhile.
Thanks so much, Arooshi. We will try to get to a few more questions, and we're almost at time. So if anything gets unanswered, I'll promise to pass it over to Arooshi so she can reply to it async, and I will share all her responses with everyone who registered today. While Arooshi is looking through the Q&A, I'll also just launch a quick poll. Would love to hear any thoughts you had on today's event as well. All right, while the poll is running, Arooshi, maybe we can dig into the Q&A a bit, maybe answer a few questions. The first one is Prakhar's question about how insurance companies are represented as stakeholders, since he assumes insurance companies would be one of the recipients of a company's ESG report.
Yeah. Actually, yes, this is I based on the reading that I've done and what I'm seeing is that in the US especially, the insurance function or just the data around climate risk is a lot more mature, right? Again, I am from India. In India, it's really hard to get reliable, just physical risk and transition risk data, right? So that's why the insurance companies there are not very advanced and have still not kind of started considering this in that much depth. But in developed geographies like I believe Australia, Canada, US, this data is very advanced, right? And that's why you have certain insurance companies that have stated that they're taking very strict action, right? I believe Florida is just uninsurable from a real estate perspective today. And you see same things happening even in California. I believe State Farm Insurance, which is, I think, the second largest insurer in the country, has kind of declared California or some parts of California uninsurable because of the forest fire situation. Right. So yes, you're right. Like insurance companies really want to look at the climate risk data and how deep you go with it.
Thank you. Addy has asked, how do you see ESG influencing corporate culture and employee engagement?
So today, not so much, but in the future, I do see that kind of taking shape. Right. I was talking about a corporate ESG journey, right? And for a company to kind of truly inculcate it, to truly start creating processes around, to truly meet their sustainability goals, right? What they start doing is start kind of having their executive pay linked to ESG. I'm so sorry. I'm getting a. I am so sorry, guys. Yeah, it's a Slack call. Yeah, sorry. Yes. So, so we see that even executive pay is being linked to ESG in certain large companies, right? Like Unilever, etc. Executive pay is being linked to sustainability goals, ESG goals, right? So once you start seeing that, we will see that percolate downwards, right? For like the operations person, when they're kind of thinking about like every action will start to kind of will have to be thought slightly differently, and that would require employees to have knowledge, right? There has to be an understanding of what really sustainability means, right? And how they can inculcate it. So today, not so much, but in the future, 100% there will be a change in just the employee's perspective around this also.
Thank you, Arooshi. I recognize that we're at time, so I'll just very openly ask you if you do have some extra minutes to spare, and we can go through a couple more questions. If not, totally understand, and we can end the call today now.
I do. I'm happy to stick around and talk. I've also put in my LinkedIn in the chat. Just feel free to connect with me, and happy to also kind of do like a chat, or else you can share your question with Shamali and I can respond to them.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll stick around for maybe another 5 minutes and try to get to a few more questions. And yeah, just as Arooshi said, if you have any pending questions, feel free to continue to post them in the Q&A thread, and I will pass them over to Arooshi to answer afterwards. All right, so we have a question from Nathan about what are the most emerging kinds of environmental data companies?
In terms of environment data, there are, I think from a company, there are lots, right? I think just depending on what kind of data you're looking at, and companies tend to have interesting approaches at it. Like some organizations are looking at how you can better utilize IoT, right, which is Internet of Things, sensors to better capture environment data. Then there are certain companies like ours, right, which kind of sits in the middle and tries to connect with multiple different data points to extract data and then do the data management and conversion into ESG. And then I think something like even climate risk, there is a big need for climate risk data. And there are some companies that are tackling that. There are certain companies that don't only look at large corporates, but also kind of try to get into supply chains as well. There again, there's another issue on this bit. Like lots of supply chain companies have their lots of supply chains sit in developing countries. And today, the climate data infrastructure in developing countries is not that advanced. So that's one big challenge, right? That while, say again, for a Novartis, they might have data for their European operations, for their US operations. Like I think I would say about 60+% of their suppliers are in just developing countries. So that's very hard to capture. But yeah, in terms of certain names, I just somehow only know ESG companies and just carbon accounting companies. So I might give you those, but let me think about it a little bit, and I'm happy to kind of write you write you a list of some of these companies.
Awesome, thank you. Everyone had a question about whether you've done any benchmark for businesses on working from the office versus remote in the ESG reports.
Yes, we have done that. Working from home is a lot better, and we do have a methodology around this as well. And again here, right, like lots of emissions data today is based on estimations as well, because just that data is not available. But yes, we've done some benchmarking on this, and I think we've written a blog on this as well. I'm not sure if that's public, but I'm happy to share that draft with you.
Okay, let's take one more question. Nathan also asked, what are the largest barriers to companies getting up to the leader stage of their ESG journey?
I think just before the leader stage, even there are barriers before that. Like number one is today just companies, it's hard to find sustainability experts, right? You need someone that can marry knowledge of sustainability with business knowledge, right? Like even when I take the example of chemical company, right? Chemicals is like a behemoth by itself from an industry perspective, right? Like you need someone who understands chemical packaging, chemical manufacturing, chemical distribution, right? All of these are just like entire subsectors of industries by themselves, right? So one of the biggest challenges is that today you need folks who have that business knowledge as well as sustainability knowledge and can marry the two to kind of implement it in a fashion that doesn't break the bank as well. So one is that lack of just folks that understand the space. The second challenge is availability of data. Today, companies really struggle to get data from within themselves, and if they solve that from their suppliers, right? So like if any company can solve their supply chain problem, they move really close to becoming that leader. And if they can kind of find a way to have the right incentives in place to get 100% compliance across their supply chains, right? That's just like a big win for them.
Thank you so much, Arooshi. I think we'll end there just to be mindful of everyone's time. There are a few more questions in the Q&A, but I will be sure to collate them and send them across to Arooshi to answer offline as well. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Arooshi, for all of your insight and your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much.